afterwards. Okay? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ria, and also for the invitation. Welcome to all of you in all parts of Europe, schools of in your offices. We're very happy, Pieter and I, that we can present to you what is going on in Flanders on the reuse of school buildings, but also and especially on the reuse of buildings of religious communities that are linked to schools, or better, and this is what we present in this presentation, when we have to think about the future of larger sites where we have as well a school building as religious buildings, or where these two kind of heritage buildings are linked to each other. So we will present you how to approach such a complex question, but in the same time on how religious and educational heritage can be used as an added value in master plans for school sites. I start with, with a photo of the nuns of my own hometown. As you know, a lot of sisters were involved in education in many schools here in Flanders, but also in other parts of the world, of course. And I just give this photograph. It's a photograph of the convent and the school in my own village, just to give you the idea of how in many villages in Flanders, in many towns in Flanders, these buildings are now reused, repurposed for other especially educational purposes. But what we want to show you is how we think about these kind of issues in Flanders, and which kind of problems can arise when we think about it. In this case, the convent itself is repurposed into an after-school childcare linked to the local school. What we will present you first, a very short overview of religious heritage in Flanders, especially religious heritage of monasteries and convents, and how this is linked to educational heritage or school heritage. Pieter will then tell you about school heritage today in Flanders, and how new developments of school buildings are made, and how older buildings are reused, and how this can be done in a durable way. We end with the case study of the site of Hoegaarden, just to situate it more or less 30-40 kilometers to the east of Brussels. This is a case study which illustrates good how we approach this kind of difficult questions where heritage and new developments are linked to each other. So the main line in this presentation is to show you that heritage can be an added value to master plans which are developed for school sites, and that it does not have to be a contradiction, but that it is one of the aspects of durability that can make a nice contribution. Very shortly about the relation between religious communities, religious men and women in Flanders, and schools. Of course, a very long history of monastic and religious life that starts in the early Middle Ages, which gets a boom with different orders and congregations in the 11th and 12th century, and later on, especially last year's 900 years of the Norbertine order, or the order of Premontré, which illustrates that we have a very rich history of monastic and religious orders and congregations. Just to make you clear that today we have especially Catholic heritage in Flanders, and when we look to the history, or to the long history of religion in our region, of course, the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation made an enormous impact, and let's say a divergence between a more Protestant northern part, which today are the Netherlands, or a mixed religion between Catholicism and Protestantism, and then in Flanders, what we call the southern Netherlands, a very strong impact of Catholicism since the 16th and especially in the 17th century. 17th century, just to illustrate here, the well-known Basilica of Scherpenheuvel, which is that typical Baroque style, which is used as a reaction against Protestantism in our regions. One of the first times that these monastic orders are threatened already at the end of the 18th century, when we see that Joseph II, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, closes a lot of monasteries and orders, which, according to him, do not have a lot of usefulness or that are especially contemplative religious institutions. So monastic orders that are involved in hospitals or schools do not have to close. So that is a very important aspect. A decision that will also come back in some years later, at the end of the 18th century, when the principles of the French Revolution are applied also in our regions, and a lot of churches, monasteries, abbeys are confiscated. We see that we get in a very difficult situation between church and state. For instance, this abbey in Drongen near Ghent, which was sold and bought by Lievenbouwers to install there his industrial machines, very known example. The Abbey of Villers-la-Ville in the French-speaking part of Belgium, which was confiscated and then destroyed in these years. So a very difficult relation between church and state, and it's Napoleon who gets with a solution where, for instance, churches and parishes and priests are paid by the state as a kind of compensation for the different buildings that were confiscated during the French period, but also the recognition of some orders and congregations which had, again, some usefulness or were useful for the broader society, in this case specifically for hospitals, but in fact also for schools. We see that during the French period, but also during the Dutch period between 1815 and 1830. And then from the start of the Belgian state in 1830, that the Belgian state finances what we call church committees, church fabrics, in order to build new churches and to found new parishes. But then in the meantime also new schools and can be financed via the Belgian state. So we get with a new constitution during the Belgian history, a very liberal constitution, the possibility for congregations to build new houses, to start with new schools, and to build a lot of new buildings that are used for parishes, for schools, and for hospitals. So that means that in the 19th century, we get a boom of new religious buildings, often in the neo-Gothic style, and that in the beginning of the 20th century, we arrive in what we call it rijke Roomse leven, a very strong impact of Catholicism on daily life, but also in the built environment. We see a lot of new buildings, churches, monasteries, convents, and also schools linked to that, to these religious houses that are appearing everywhere in Flanders. This is one of the typical examples in a small village. Get a new church, but get also a new convent where the nuns who are also involved in local education are living. That means that today, when you get by car from Brussels to the German border, let's say, or you go to another part of Flanders, you will see a lot of buildings in this style, smaller schools, bigger schools, and the colleges, but also small village schools, as we showed before. Of course, also in Flanders, we get a strong secularization after World War II. The last decades, less and less people who go to church were linked to classical Catholic communities, and as a consequence, also less religious men and women who engage themselves to become father or brother or sister in a monastery, which means that we have to think seriously about the future of these buildings. We do that for churches, and the Flemish government asks local municipalities to think about the future of their churches, but in the meantime also the future of these buildings of convents, monasteries, abbeys were very often linked also to school buildings. In 2013, we still had 281 independent orders and congregations. So these are the overarching orders and congregations in Flanders. This means that underneath these larger congregations and orders, we have a lot of smaller houses in all parts of Flanders, in all parts of our cities and villages. In 2013, more than 1,000 religious houses. In 2017, as you can see on the slide, 770 of these houses. But we see in the numbers that as well the houses, but also their inhabitants are decreasing year after year. In 2017, still 6,000 religious men and women in Flanders, but they're decreasing with more or less 500 a year, which means if we use this number, that in 2030 we would be virtually to nearly no religious men or women in Flanders. It will never be zero, but it indicates that from these 770 houses we still had in 2017, the next 10 years, a lot of them will have to be repurposed, or we have to think about a new destination, a new function. This is a photo of all religious men and women of one village in the 1950s, 1960s, and today a lot of awareness about what will happen with these buildings. Newspaper articles about the last father or the last sister of this congregation, a lot of reflection about this. Dramatic numbers, but it does not have to be automatically negative. We are convinced that if you do this in the right way, we can continue to tell their story, to take the good things of these very intensive history into new projects, into new master plans, that the spirit of these congregations and orders, the spirit of these places can be taken to the next generation. It is, of course, very important to think about this equilibrium between two aspects of the problem. On the one hand, being able to give good care to the older religious communities, so have a financial basis for them, and at the other side, be able to passing on the soul of this place and congregation to the next generation, especially we're talking about today when the presence of this order is on a school site and the buildings have to be involved in. There are a lot of publications about what is exactly the core of this religious life and how to pass this on to the next generation. And what we see very practically is that often one chooses for direct result project developers who buy a site and repurpose it without always taking care of the message that a local congregation or order wants to convey to the next generation or to the broader public. The other side of the spectrum is think very good about the significance of these buildings, of the history, and integrate this story into a new project, a new plan for the future. This is exactly what we try to do with Parcum in collaboration with Herbe on a lot of sites. We look to the immovable religious heritage. What is the story that the building tells about this congregation, about the activities, apostolic activities like education that they did last years. We look to the collection that is present in these buildings and try to understand the story that these objects tell us. In the same time, look to intangible religious heritage, the traditions, devotions that are linked to the congregations and orders. And of course, also in collaboration with the colleagues of CADOC, we look to the archives and libraries which are present on these sites. So Parcum focuses on all these aspects of religious heritage, and we try to formulate a story that can be integrated in a new master plan. It's something that we collaborate with as well on the site of the Abbey of Park, where our offices are located in the periphery of Leuven. But we do this on a lot of sites, working with the larger public to think about the future of sites, but also involve smaller groups or children to think about the future. Very briefly, and then I pass the word to Pieter, some examples of school chapels that are integrated in a new story, where, for instance, this architecturally very beautiful concept is integrated in an old school chapel, a sport hall that is integrated, as you can see here, or a chapel in Sydney Class, where classes are integrated in a former chapel on a school site. This one, for instance, also a prize from the Flemish government. And then also school chapels who are repurposed, but where the spiritual or the spiritual aspect remains very important, where in a new way these chapels are used to talk with young people about spirituality, about the deeper questions in life, but used starting from new architecture, as you can see also in this example. So very briefly about the history of these congregations, how congregations are linked to school infrastructure, and what are the perspectives we have for the future. Pieter, I invite you to continue with school infrastructure.
Thank you, Jonas. Good morning on my behalf. I am, in fact, Pieter Verfaillie. I am one of the founders of Herbe. Maybe technically, I see, Jochen, you have your hand up. At the end of the presentation, there will be some space for questions, if that's okay. So Herbe is a research agency specialized in redevelopments of complex heritage projects. And we do this based on heritage expertise on the one hand, combined with design research around architecture and urbanism on the other. But the slide is already there. I would like to start with giving you a little sketch of our school infrastructure in Flanders in this 21st century. So at the beginning of this century, Flanders finally got to work on, let's say, seriously dilapidated heritage of school buildings. In my history of working in school environments, I saw children often being given lessons in buildings that were structurally inadequate. Sometimes the roof literally was not there above the upper classroom, and sometimes lessons were given on top of truly unique cellar mold situations. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. I do this on purpose, but there was a really extensive need of renewed school environments at the beginning of the years 2000. And then more especially in 2006, the government finally finalized a plan that they worked out in PPP, public-private partnership formula. They were called DBFM also, DBFM standing for Designing, Building, Financing and Maintaining the Buildings. Since 2006, schools could subscribe to this model, so in which new school infrastructure would be built, and they would then pay a lease for the coming 30 years. This formula, this DBFM formula, provided the guarantee that the school buildings and its equipment would be kept in perfect condition by the maintain during these fully 30 years they are running now. And at the end of the 30 years, the lessee, the school, became the owner of, in fact, buildings with equipment and playgrounds in a nearly new situation. So under this formula, the past 15 years, no less than 182 schools or school areas were realized, covering over 710,000 square meters and giving new buildings to 133,000 pupils in Flanders. So let's say that's quite a success, but it doesn't stop there. Today, in 2022, the DBFM formulas we have known at the beginnings of this century, they have run their course, but they are introducing a new formula. And for new buildings, if I can have the next slide, Jonas. For new buildings, it's quite easy. They invented the rent subsidy. The investment of the government grants that they give there is related to the number of pupils schools have at the beginning of the year. Next to that, we still have the short procedures, a bit better known in school environments now. The short procedures are quickly, but they are very small in amounts. They work with 85,000 euros up to 125,000 euros. The schools can do small things, but sometimes very necessary things. For example, building new sanitary, small new space outside playgrounds and so on. But the next big thing today is named not DBFM or Schools of Tomorrow. It is called Schools of Flanders. So a government realized 1 billion euros, and schools can subscribe to this formula until the end of this month into this new program that will provide in the continuation of the new school environments. At the level of heritage, Jonas, yes, we also have formulas. On the one hand, we have the open call of Heritage Flanders, on which schools can subscribe with their schools. And when the open call is answered by this particular school, AGION, the subsidy part of the government that provides subsidies for school environments, can connect to the open call. So that's a double system that's especially being worked out for heritage school environments here. Very important next to the schools of Flanders in comparison to the DBFM formula that we have known, is that the government doesn't work together. It's not a PPP, it's quite a private partnership, but the government rolled it all out. For more details, I invite you after the presentation. So that's the sketch of how the school environments in Flanders are there and what kind of subsidies, financial structures there are now. And that brings us to the case that we would like to show you today. Our case is called Domein Mariadal. It is situated in Hoegaarden. As Jonas pointed out, that's 30 kilometers on the western side of Brussels in Flanders, right there. You can see on the picture what a lovely heritage site we have. The Domein Mariadal, it goes back to 1450, where it was built as a monastery. And the buildings, as I said, they are located in a park of 4.5 hectares. It's quite a large green site. It has been in the hands of the congregation Sœurs de l'Union au Sacré-Cœur since 1820. That's exactly 200 years from here, almost exactly. And there has been a school operating on the site since the sisters arrived there in 1820. The school group now that is there is a group from Tienen, a village nearby, and it's called St. Paulus. They offer the model of both model school, but also special education in as well nursery, primary and secondary schools. As we are talking about the unique connection between heritage and educational building, it's important to point out that the school is housed in buildings of, on the one hand, recognized heritage value. The entire site is listed as valuable in terms of its landscape heritage. And on the left, you can see the beautiful St. Rochus Kapel on the picture. And that's the part of the building that has the status of a monument. In terms of planning regulations, urban regulations, the entire site on the plan, maybe you can point out, Jonas, the green dot in the northern side of the, in the northern side, it's the other green dot, yeah, there. That is, it's an entirely designated park area. What does that mean for urban regulation? That is that adding new buildings will be more or less out of the question. So if we look at the next slide, the question is, how do you go about how do you start realizing a project like this one? We start out with request. The question starts from the requests by the sisters. 7 of them today, 9 of them 2 years ago when we started this story. And we are talking about to plan out the future of Mariadal and to work out the dream of the sisters, which ideally, of course, they would like to experience in their own lifetimes. So we need to continue the study. I say this in the view that the average age of the sisters now, as Jonas also told, they are over 85 years old. So the challenge lies in catching and then defining the dreams, their dreams, but also the dreams of the other stakeholders on the board, being the village Hoegaarden, and the dreams of the schools, which you can see the model school and the special education that they offer. First of all, we need a master plan, and I like to hover in my helicopter as an urbanist. So viewed from the air, we noticed that Hoegaarden's elongated shape contained a number of green stepping stones, as we call them. We literally walked this, and from the center, at the bottom of the picture, the green dot, the big green dot, there lies the center with the church next to it. We saw that we had a lot of green stepping stones that are connected or connecting the two big green rooms of Hoegaarden. So we are talking about, we can talk about the next garden of Hoegaarden, being Mariada. This point of departure in the wider context of Hoegaarden ultimately meant that the municipality could also benefit from it. And that's what we were looking for, to make Hoegaarden also have benefits from this master plan. And in order to realize and further define the sisters' dream, we needed to engage Hoegaarden too. We listened to their concerns, so we went to sit at the table with the mayor and its schepenen, I don't know the word. And then we learned about their mobility issues around the school. We learned about the difficulty making agreements on the use of the sports hall of the municipality, which is located right outside. So we could conclude that there were some elements that Hoegaarden also would like to be seen solved in the big master plan. So it became clear that in addition to the two visible actors, being the school group and the sister, that the municipality was another actor that had to be taken into seriously account. That they too had certain wishes that could be fulfilled through the project. And after discussions at the level of the school with the various directors, we have 4 of them, it became clear that the school was really struggling with problems around the buildings themselves, as well as with challenges around aspects such as I named out, sanitary facilities, separate playgrounds, as well as privacy issues for special education. It furthermore became evident that there was an acute shortage of space. As strange as this might sound in such spacious surroundings and buildings. All forms of education that we had there were literally mixing up. They were constantly coming into conflict with each other. But before we started the design, Jonas shows the picture, we surveyed the heritage value. What we did was dividing the entire building inside and outside into zones of high, medium and low heritage value. And this became our guide to determine the level of interventions possible in any particular space in the building. Once we had that, we started looking for space. Firstly, we did it by optimizing the use of space within the existing walls of the monastery. And there literally was empty space available that we could use. And parallel to this exercise, we sought to split the various sections. Special education, taking aside to modal education. And that way we could ensure that people from one section didn't have to use another section for lunch or anything else, for example. Once this puzzle had become somewhat more clearer inside the existing walls, we started looking for the possibility of new buildings, as the master plan shows. After listening to the directors, it was something special pointed out. We saw an ambition of the school to offer a so-called teenage school. This is not an official form of education, but it provides for the grouping of the 2 last years of the primary education, special primary education, with the first 2 years of the special secondary education. In the western part of the site, where the numbers 3 and 4 are, We had woodworking and metalworking offered in old sheds. These buildings were very outdated, and knowing that we are in a park area by regulations of urban regulations, we saw there the opportunity to provide a new building, to make some new square meters of floor. And what we did was placing the new building largely on the footprint of the existing shed there in the west. And why we did that was this is on the one hand, on the existing footprint, and on the other hand, we wanted it to be as far as possible away from the monastery itself, because we didn't want it to compete with the heritage. The new buildings couldn't compete with the heritage. And there we added some more space for the teenage school, in more square meters, because we had to solve the general issue of capacity of square meters. There are also some other buildings in this part, some smaller buildings. We call it the Austria building and the Villa Irena. Jonas can point them out, the small green dots on the western part. There we also saw the opportunity by means of restoration, renovation, realizing some new square meters without building new volumes. I think at the previous slides, or at the next slide, this one, there's an old map there. The next one, Jonas. Previous one, on the old map, which you can see on the right corner. So on historical research, we saw that the site once had 2 patios, as you can see, there. This gave us reason to see if we could add some new volume here too, as pointed out at number 1. This created a new outdoor space that we could use to give the monastery part on the right, where number 2 is in, which is moving towards a living care, a care living form, a bit more privacy. So finally, in the end master plan, as you can see here, you can see that the school area, the purple, green, orange, and then yellow zone are completely orientated towards the west, where we added 2 new entrances. With this, we aimed to keep the streams of children somewhat under control and away from the new residential function. The residential function is in the pink zone, the monastery with the chapel. And we would like to realize the residential function with a care factor and in the upper levels of this zone, this mirrored H, as you can see. But at the ground floor, together with the chapel, that will be kept free for cultural use. Here we want to continue to tell the story of Mariadal, the story of the sisters, 200 years of Mariadal. And we do that in a sort of museum. We will also provide there in the ground floor a small catering function that on the one hand will cater for the cultural activities already taking place in the chapel, but also for the larger people of Hoegaarden and abroad, for cyclists, tourists and walkers who we want to encourage to use the park. In the end, at the level of the landscape master plan, we will act the same. The trees, some of which are in a bad state, they will also be scanned and assessed just like the buildings in terms of high, medium and low quality heritage value. And just as with the buildings, the assessment will also be the guiding principle for landscape design and the restoration of the outsides entirely. We will also look at the potential of the large water feature. As you can see on the picture left above, there's a lot of water there. It's a park, and this blue layer will remain dominant, possibly slightly reduced in shape, given by the climate change, the drought as we have. So to summarize, we have currently found support among all stakeholders, school, Hoegaarden, and the sisters, for the future of use in which education will continue and improve furthermore, where the story of Mariadal can live on through the cultural museum interpretation, and in which the sisters can continue to live in the new arrangement of living with a care factor, as we name it. So today we are at the stadium that we are looking for investors, so we can jointly roll out the story for the next 200 years. Voila, that's our little story of Mariadal and the sketch of schools. I hope you were interested, and I presume some questions are popping up.
Okay, thank you very much, Pieter, Jonas also. You learned us about the case study of Mariadal, but you learned us much more as well. Historical part of the story.
Thank you very much, Pieter. So indeed, this was an example of
Dumaro.
Yeah.
Okay. We have still 5 minutes for questions. Jonas, there's the question of Jochen, which is goes back to the 17th century. Maybe Jochen, you can explain yourself what your question is.
I come from biochemistry, and we have many years of investigation landed in medical history, and was glad that I was brought in contact with the history of the Van Helmont family, Johann and Baptist, who have been into, I think, Antwerp and Brussels in this area. And I think their way of, it's almost like an architecture for healing methods. And I guess that there are some places in your area where this mix of education, medical healing, and religious services go into each other. They were Paracelsus, so this famous total mix of theology and medicine. And I hope that there are some sources, some rests, and because I think for today, education, not only in schools, but also in universities, are necessary. I live now 10 years in Munich, where there's a lot of Catholicism, but this is missing. There's not anymore a deep, there's some spiritual healing things, but I think this mix of architecture, education for many different ages, from young to now, would make sense. So I'm interested if there are some similar elements for even advanced education where these resources from history are used in your area.
Mm-hmm. At the moment, I do not have an example in mind where perhaps other people are listening can give some examples in Flanders, but I think the mix of what you call education, hospitals or more healthcare, and then in the same time architecture that is used for both or for a mixed site. As I very briefly mentioned it, but a lot of neo-Gothic buildings or this architecture is used as well for hospitals as for schools, and it is more for higher education when, for instance, a nursery school is located very close to a hospital, and so it exists. But I don't know. Perhaps Ria or colleagues can give a specific example. What is interesting for me, I think, and also in the site of Hoegaarden, which Pieter presented, is that if we can install a new care aspect on that site where elder people can live, but in the same time, people who work or who get lessons in the school can practice what they learn immediately on the site, that is a very interesting aspect where the physical location on the same site can make also a mix between education and the practical work as well for education as for healthcare. So yeah.
Because in framework there's Time Machine in Europe, which goes similar to your direction. Then there's this Bauhaus Europe initiative, and of course EIT Health. But EIT Health, I know them now since years. They're very much focusing on IT, of high technology. And they don't really, and I noticed this in Hamburg. My thesis advisor came to Munich at the Technical University, which is famous. They didn't understand him. He was an expert of Baroque thinking. He tried to link Baroque thinking with IT, artificial intelligence. And this link has not yet been really accomplished. And I think Europe has an amazing strength. I know it from Denmark. There are some people, I think they are spread around Europe. Barcelona, there are some. I know this Universidad Pompeu Fabra, they did MOOC on medical. So Europe has amazing resources in this respect.
Okay, maybe I can add to that, but I notice Joris Kolla participated also in the exchange. There is a new project started up where KADOC plays an important role. He's partner in it, where care is being the topic of being more careful about the heritage. Maybe you can explain a little bit about this project. This can help you when you're looking for research possibilities, because that's your question, I think.
Yeah, there's such a new mix, which has been existing and now should get a renaissance.
Yeah, I will put a link on the CARE project in the chat.
Thank you.
This is a project focused on care heritage in 4 regions: Bruges, Leuven, the Meetjesland, and south of Limburg. But it's not focused on buildings; it's focused on the objects, the collections, the archives, just the movable and the intangible heritage, but not the immovable heritage, because that's not within our competences. We'll put a link in the chat.
Thank you.
And there is in Wallonie, there's the Hôpital de la Rose, which when you were explaining, I was thinking about it in Lessines. It's a kind of similar convent as exists in Beaune in France. And the history goes up to the Middle Ages, but I don't know how many archives are collected there and how education was practiced, but maybe it could be interesting for you. I think we have to finish. Does anyone have a question? I notice Ahmed have a question, or no?
For Jochen, I would like to add that in the western part of Flanders, West Flanders, I think maybe it's interesting to look at Sanapolis. I think that's also an interesting project, being a large religious site being orientated towards a health campus. Maybe I link it through
Sanapolis
in this thing to you.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? Maybe I have one for you, Pieter. In fact, I had 2 questions, but maybe we can talk about it also afterwards. You talk about creating different zones in Mariadal. That seems to be rather important. Are there no zones where there is interaction between the different stakeholders? When I look here at the site, there is interaction. We are creating a new playground, and it really is the purpose there to make it available as well for the elderly, to create zones where they can walk, and other zones where pupils can play. So to create zones with mixed use.
Yeah, that's in fact the idea. But the school, especially given that they are offering special education, which asks for special treatments, it sometimes is given that they want privacy.
Okay.
When they give a certain treatment inside and outside, it's not okay when people they can't give it a place when something happens and they interact with pupils in a way that you wouldn't expect. But today the zones are orientated that model model education is there, and it is not mixed with special education, special pupils, because sometimes there's aggression on the playground, and that we make outside and inside easily, clearly in zones. But in the end, it's the idea that we have the world of the school, we have the world of the museum and the living part, where the sisters and other people will live in a sort of a co-living situation. And in that, you have the park entering, where people from outside, you and me, can go and visit, have a beer on the terrace, the little catering that is inside there. And in that way, we want to open the entire site to the wider public. That's the idea, but we do that in steps.
Okay. So also the involvement of pupils in this project, at which level will they be involved, or are they already involved in the creation, in the repurposing, or will they be involved once the museum is there and you start, I suppose, creating educational activities? How do you see it in Hoegaarden? Because you have a special public, of educational public, I notice, special target groups.
You want to answer, Jonas, or do I answer?
Oh, I can very briefly, and then you can add. I think the school is also thinking about a organization of which kind of educational direction they will go to. So, for instance, when they're now focused with their elder pupils on woodworking and metalworking, they want to enlarge their courses on working with trees and green. And so then it would be very interesting to link the activities in the park with their new educational approach to green management. So that's something we're thinking about. And in the same time, what we were saying about the aspect of drinking something, eating something on the side, or the care aspect, it can be linked to what on an educational level is offered. But the school itself is rethinking also which kind of educational packages they will develop in the years to come. So that makes that also, it is an open question, which makes it interesting to adapt it also to what is necessary on the site.
Okay.
An important element there is that the school is using, by means of its four education forms that they offer there, they are taking the larger part of the site, as you saw in the master plan. And it's important that also, in terms of keeping it alive and making it possible, that they, and that might sound strange, that they are looking for school and education functions that make a kind of economic win. So we find, next to the subsidies that are there through the open call and the Agion subsidy, that they also, for example, add something by means of the landscape design, that they can offer their services outside the school, or by means of a catering, opening some sort of a small HoReCa function, or giving support there. That's very important in the next steps, by the pupils, introducing the pupils furthermore into the entire story.
Okay, very, very interesting and impressive. But unfortunately, time is running, and we have to to finish this exchange, but the email context will be shared afterwards. So if there are any questions left, they can be handled afterwards. Thank you very much, and you're welcome for the other talks in any case, Pieter and Jonas. I'm going to close down this meeting link. I see you hopefully immediately for the next one. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.